It is really good to have you here. And this session is what the was that about? And it's the what, why, how, and guide to understanding traumatized children. And in this session, I'm going to take you on a journey, some stories, some metaphors, and introduce you to a number of different children. And at the end of this, you will have a number of different tools, different ways of thinking, and I hope you will have transformed how you think about the children in front of you. And we're going to start in a classroom. And in this classroom, there's a bunch of kids, it's just before lunch, and a substitute teacher walks in and says, right, okay, everybody be quiet, be quiet. And, you know, it's not an awful lot of reaction. And then the substitute teacher slams his fist down and says, be quiet. Sandy looks at her friends, sniggers a little bit, and stops talking. Tammy just shrinks down. And Tim, well, Tim, don't you, Tim gets really aggressive. Now, are you curious about why Tim, Tammy, and Sandy are responding differently? If you are curious, then stay with me and we'll go through a journey to understand why all of these three kids are different. And if not, I mean, it's probably time to go off and do something else. But I really hope that you will stay with me. So, what is lurking below the presenting behaviour of these three? And before we go into that, let me just clarify what I mean by behaviour. And behaviour is the external, what do you see? If you were a fly on the wall looking in, what would you be seeing? If you were the teacher standing in that classroom, what behaviour would you be observing? Now that's of interest, but the really useful stuff is deeper in terms of what are the beliefs that are underneath that behaviour. And beliefs are internal, they're created through personal experience, and the most enduring are formed during infancy. And that's where we're going to start. And we're going to start with Sandy. And this, in an ideal world, is what happens to all infants. The baby is resting and then it has a bit of discomfort. And mum comes in and goes, oh, Sandy, what's wrong? You got a smelly nappy. Oh, I'll pick you up. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you're all right. Okay. Oh, and the baby and the mum interact. And Sandy learns from mum how to start self-regulating, and she starts developing ideas about her world. And she learns that actually she's safe, she's secure, there are people around who are going to look after her. There's a place for her, she's welcome. Now, in an ideal world, we all would like children to be like Sandy. And I want you to think for a minute, well, if that's what it's like Sandy as an infant, what's she going to be like as a toddler? Well, she's probably going to be a bit stroppy. She's going to have those appropriate toddler tantrums because she's learning to separate from mum and forming her own boundaries. What's she going to be like at 4 or 5 when she starts going to school? How is she likely to behave? Excuse me. When she's 9 or 10, what's she going to be like? When she's 13, 14, she's probably going to be a bit of a stroppy teenager because that's what adolescence is like and should be like for normally developing children, securely attached normally developing youngsters like Sandy. At 17, 19, hopefully she's still in education and she's got friends, interests. Yeah, she's going to probably experiment with booze and drugs, but an experiment rather than a need to do it. And when she's 23, 25, what's her life going to be like? What's she going to be doing? Now, that's the ideal world that we would like for all children. Sadly, it's not like that. We've got TAMIE. Now, TAMIE comes from an environment where it's not so good. She doesn't have an empathic parent. Actually, TAMIE's mum is quite inadequate and she's quite scared. And she's quite weak. She's bound, you know, on the borders of good enough or possibly a bit below if we use Winnicott's phrase. But she also has an angry partner who shouts a lot and sometimes can be violent. So TAMIE is growing up surrounded, sometimes with a bit of domestic violence, and she has a mother who is fearful. So TAMIE starts thinking about the world in a different way. And TAMIE's learning that actually people can be hostile, they can be anxious, and you know what, it's a bit challenging. So it's quite a good idea to just maybe stay small. And as a toddler, she becomes quite compliant. Now, we know that this is not normal in child development. Compliant toddlers is a warning sign, but she's learned from her mum. Now, when she starts at school, when she's 5, what do you think the sort of behaviour you're likely to see for her? Might take her a while to get settled in school. She might be one of those kids that really doesn't want to let go of mum because, well, what's going to happen to mum? What's going to happen to me? Maybe when she's 9 or 10, what do you think she's going to behave like? She might be a smiler and a nodder. Smile, nod, a people pleaser, keep people happy, because in her inner world, if I keep other people happy, I might stay safe. As she gets to 13, 14, how's she going to process those feelings that she has inside? She might start repressing some anger. She might be compliant. She might turn some of this inside. She might be a self-harmer. She might be perfect for grooming. Now, what's her behavior going to be like when she gets to 17, 19? How's she going to keep people happy? Maybe she becomes promiscuous as a way of managing the environment she's in. What happens when she's 19, 20, 21, 23? How does she manage her anxiety and her fearfulness? Does she use drugs? Does she use alcohol? Does she have outbursts of uncontrollable anger? Or does, again, she turn it inside? Does she have mental health issues? Does she continue to smile and nod? I wonder, what will TAMIE's world be like? Now let's think about Tim. Now, Tim is in a different environment. Tim is a child who's neglected. And when he cries and nobody responds. So he cries louder. And then mum doesn't respond. So he cries even louder. And then mum responds, either by saying, oh, shut up, you. Or again, she doesn't respond. And so Tim gives up, but rage develops inside him instead of trust. And as a result, these are the sorts of beliefs that he might have about himself and the world. And he's terrified. and he knows people hurt you, and it's a hostile word, and there's no place for me, I'm not important. What is Tim's experience? And just think again, what's he likely to behave like when he's 2? Now, he might have massive toddler tantrums because he's learned no self-regulation skills. So he's absolutely out there. What's he like at 5? Is he one of those kids who sits and pulls his hair out? Does he run around a lot? Because, you know, if you run around, people can't catch you and then they can't hurt you. So that can be useful. What's it going to be like at 9 or 10? When he gets to 13, 15, what's he going to be like? Is he going to be known to the local police? Is he going to be known to the youth offending team? Is he going to be attending school? How angry is he? How violent might he be? When he gets to 19, where is he? What's he doing? He might be in a gang. He might be in prison. He might have been involved. He might have been groomed. He may also be quite a good candidate for county lines, the use of kids to traffic drugs. When he's 23, where's he going to be? What's his world going to look like? So thinking about what's happened for Tim and for TAMIE is trauma. They have experienced trauma. And this is just a high-level definition of trauma. That psychological trauma, 2 conditions, either an overwhelm of affect, emotion, feeling that somebody is unable to integrate, or a feeling or a belief that they might die. And if you think about Tim and TAMIE, they will fall into the category of kids who've experienced trauma. And that has a legacy. Quoting Bessel van der Kolk and his book, The Body Keeps the Score, thinking about trauma, it's sensory, it's somatic, it is body-based. And if we think about the autonomic nervous system, and for example, Stephen Porges, the polyvagal theory, another speaker at this conference, tremendously useful information about how the body keeps the score. With trauma, we're in base reptilian brain. That's where it is. There is no language, there is no thinking. The brain is processing faster because obviously it makes sense to stay safe. And it's survival seeking and safety behavior that is being observed. And when you're in trauma, when that's happening, you are only in now. And it's about now. Not past, not future. And there is no language. It is all in the somatic and the body. That has implications. I'd like us to drill down and just think about what it is like for Tim in the cot. And what is he is lying alone, and mum has gone out for a pint of milk. But she went out a couple of days ago and she went out on a bender, and it's not for the first time. So he is lying in a cot and all he's had is darkness. What can he smell? He can smell the sour milk that's spilt on his thin yellow blanket. And he can smell the contents of his own nappy. And in his mouth, he can taste a combination of milk and vomit. What does he hear? He might hear shouting. There might be an argument. He might hear slamming doors. What does he touch? Well, he touches the nappy rash that's from his waist down to his knees. And what does he feel? He has a pain in his stomach from hunger, and his feet are cold. This is one single experience of neglect. And I have a model that says this is a piece of sensory shrapnel, and this is stored in the implicit memory. There are no words, and it's in the sensory database. And my metaphor is that we have a piece of shrapnel, in this case, green plastic shrapnel, that represents that. Now for Tim, he's had quite a lot of these. So he has this in his body. For TAMIE, it's different. She's got different shrapnel. Now her shrapnel is fundamentally fear. And so it's blue shrapnel, and it might be blue, like wood, pieces of wood that are in TAMIE's body. And TAMIE is this terrified, anxious, maligned, insecure, emotionally, this child who is full of fear. Now, there are different sorts of maltreatment. There might be emotional abuse, like the orange, and which, my metaphor, it's like ninja throwing stars. When a child is emotionally abused, you're stupid. You're stupid. You made me do this. You're nothing. It's like bang. Those stars just bang, and they go in. There might be what I think of as red glass, that violence, when there is violence around. The fear that we've talked about before, which is like the blue wood. And then there's the, we have our little secret. Our little secret. You are my little precious, that goes with sexual abuse, which I'm calling grey metal. And it is not just one maltreatment that happens to most kids. It is a combination, often, of some maltreatment, a bit of physical abuse, maybe some sexual, maybe some emotional, and fear. So for a child like Tim, TAMIE, there will be different types of maltreatments and assorted shrapnel in different shapes and sizes. So you start to get an impression of how and why these kids behave the way that they do, because what happens is that the trauma, the shrapnel, is triggered. So let's go back to the classroom and just think. We're going via, I'm sorry, I'd forgotten that was there. That's my books, which gives you a lot more detail. Let's go back to the classroom and think about what is going on, in particular for TAMIE and Tim. Now, one of the things that TAMIE and Tim do when they are in the cot, when they are being abused, when they are being maltreated, the metaphor that I use is that they use bubble wrap to protect themselves. Now, we wrap things that are valuable in bubble wrap. It might be this kind of bubble wrap. It might be a different sort of shape and style of bubble wrap, but we put it on to protect things. Now, I think that metaphorically, that's what children who are being maltreated do. They put the bubble wrap on. But the challenge is that it distorts their view of the world and the world's view of them. So when it comes to being in the classroom, here we have the tin shrapnel obscures his shrapnel. Now, in the classroom, there was the timing just before lunch. Now he's hungry. There was the bang crash of the teacher. There was the shouting, "Be quiet," from the teacher. And he put his hand to his face, and Tim has acne now. And that's an echo of the nappy rash. So we can see that the triggers from his time in the cot have just been pressed and activated. And so Tim's, "Don't you stay away," whoa, aggressive response is actually trauma-triggered behaviour. Now, what's going on under that bubble wrap is Tim is terrified. He's full of fear. But it comes out because it's coming out in his sympathetic nervous system as fight, flight. He's gonna, unconsciously, he's trying to escape. He's trying to get away because those triggers have been pressed. Now, for TAMIE, what did we notice with TAMIE? Well, with TAMIE, she shrunk down. She got smaller. Now, she has bubble wrap. But what's happened with her, maybe her autonomic nervous system has gone into freeze. She's in her dorsal vagal and she's just maybe dissociated, maybe just completely out of it. But she is also having a trauma-triggered response to what went on. Now think about the beliefs that are going to be occurring below the bubble wrap for TAMIE, for Tim, and other children like them. Just think about what it's like to have those beliefs of helplessness, worthlessness, hopelessness. And if you want to see more, think about what is going on inside Tim. I am bad. At an identity level, he views himself as bad. Not necessarily consciously, but it's what's going on. If you want to see more about Tim and how he is formed, I've got some stuff on YouTube which you might find useful on the Helen Oakwater YouTube channel. There's more at the Fab Parents website, a lot more detail, a lot more delving into Tim, TAMIE's, and others. I want to take you through now thinking about, well, we've looked at some concepts, some whys. The implication of this, well, so what? You know, this is all fine and good, but so what? And then there is the application, the how-to. Now, I don't have time to do an awful lot of the how-to, although there are a couple at the end. but the implications, so what? And thinking about this CIA concept, which I learned from the much missed Grant Susler, who I flew to Australia to learn from, because I was so blown away by his work in the multiple brain integration techniques, which again you might find useful. Suzanne Henwood is another speaker at this conference, so if you want to go down that avenue as well, learning that, well, so what? Thinking about the so whats. This cartoon is another way of representing what's gone on with Tim and Sandy. Sandy has this lovely secure attachment. Tim doesn't. Well, so what? What are the ramifications of that as Sandy develops, as Tim develops? You think about what's happened in those classrooms. What happens if you're parenting Tim? What happens if you're Tim's birth parent, Sandy's birth parent? What happens if you're fostering Tim? You've probably got no idea of what went on. What happens if you've adopted Tim? Again, you probably have no idea of what was happening. That's why the so what and the CIA is so useful, thinking about what the ramifications are. So what are your expectations through time? Whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, you're a social worker, how do you expect a child or children to develop? Is this going to be realistic or fantasy for Tim, for TAMIE? What might happen at any stage, particularly for Tim and TAMIE, if there's been no intervention? If you are a parent, and I speak as an adoptive parent who started learning about trauma when it walked into my home in the early 1990s on 6 little legs. Yes, 6. I adopted a sibling group of 3. So not alone, I was married at the time. But that's how I started learning. And I learned how my expectations needed to change as time went on, because I had to recognize that I had children with shrapnel inside them. It took me a long time to realize that. And I went off and studied and learnt, and I am naturally curious. So I've been off learning, hoping to understand, and then writing and presenting and training, sharing what I've learned, learning tools, hence going to Australia and America to learn from experts in their field how to melt trauma, how to transform. Those things are really important. But what is going to happen to Tim without any intervention? What is going to be going on for him? He needs help in reframing. So let's imagine that Tim has been removed by the police as an infant. And I actually talk about this in the first chapter of Bubble Wrap Children, which I haven't got open, but I talk about how Tim is, what his experience is, what's the experience of the birth parents, what's the experience of the police who came along and removed him, the social workers, because everybody has a different perspective on this. If Tim can have some help reframing that it wasn't his fault, that actually mum's boyfriend was drunk, and the policeman who came and rescued him was because he was important. The social workers, the judges made the decision that actually Tim was so important, he needed to be removed. Having that help in understanding that makes a massive difference to Tim. And remember, 0 to 7, kids believe that what happened to them was their fault, was their responsibility. It's because they have magical thinking. Once they're beyond 7, they can start thinking differently. So this whole reframing becomes really useful. And then as he gets older, let's reframe it again so that he can learn, well, that I lived, when I was an infant, I was neglected. And I know that actually, because I was hungry in my cot, I know that when I get hungry, God, it triggers me and I'm not good. So I now know, I'm 13, 14 as a teenager. If I get hungry, God, I'm awful. And I know that I can keep myself clean. So by reframing and understanding and learning, for Tim to learn about what really happened to him with full age-appropriate truth-telling is so important. With robust interventions, reframing, melting trauma, Tim can grow and change into potentially thinking of himself as an okay kid. Now, this is not an instant, there's no magic bullet, it doesn't happen in one go. It is a long and difficult process to help Tim come to terms with the trauma that he experienced. It requires, in my view, intervention over a long period. It's not a one-off. It requires therapeutic parenting to undo the damage, filling developmental gaps. All of those things are vital. And it is not one size fits all. And it's different things at different times for different kids. So if, to quote Milton Erickson, if the only tool you have in your toolkit is a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. And sadly, there are some therapists who only have a hammer. You need, if you are working with kids who've been traumatized, multiple perspectives, multiple tools, multiple ways of working to help a child melt their trauma and construct and reframe the events they've had. So I've talked a little bit about melting trauma. We have to rewire the brain, recalibrate, calm the body. That's where the ANS material comes in. Truth-telling. I am absolutely firm that it has to be 100% truth-telling in an age-appropriate way. And some people, they don't like that. The child already knows, the child has it in their body. That's why they have to have a story that matches their experience in their body. The filling in the gaps, I don't have time to talk about that now. It is something I talk about in the training material that I do. And if you want to do some training with me, there's some material that I have. There's some that's online for free, and there is an online course, and it is professionally filmed. Yes, that's me. And you can buy you can have a look at the free course. You can buy training material. There's a link there. And it's somewhere else because I'm not sure if that link might be missing a bit off the end there. So you can check that out. When it comes to regulating and teaching and learning, think about Tim. He didn't learn how to self-regulate. You think about Sandy. Her mum picked her up and cuddled her and held her. She learnt self-regulation. Sandy learnt from her mother. It is not something a child can learn without adult intervention, without good interaction. It is the dance of attunement that has to go on between child and adult. Quoting Bruce Perry, Boy Who Raised the Dog, brilliant book, worth reading. He was the psychiatrist who, amongst other things, was at the Waco siege and worked with the kids there. Each chapter tells a different story about different children. Brilliant book. But Bruce Perry says, dysregulated children in school will not learn. Now, let's go back to that scene in the classroom. And actually, the teacher, be quiet, he is not regulating the children. What he's trying to do is reason and tell them what to do. So he's starting on number 3. Well, that might work with Sandy, but it's probably not going to work with Tammy and Tim. What you have to do with kids who are dysregulated is, first step, regulate. Now, my extra to that is the first person that you have to regulate is self. So you have to go, okay, calm. Notice where I'm breathing. High breathing. No. Drop it down to, I need to stomach breathe. I need to ground. I need to get myself regulated. I have to be in my appropriate section of autonomic nervous system. I need to be in that window of tolerance. I need to be able to think as well as feel. Okay, I am now regulated. Now I can start potentially helping the child to regulate. Then relate. And then reason. And the simple, consistent, open approach is what's needed. So, very simplistic overview of the autonomic nervous system, being in this window of tolerance in the middle where you can think and feel. Hypervigilant, over-vigilant, that's when you're in fight, flight. That's the sympathetic nervous system, which can be useful sometimes. And it may be you can be in both the window of tolerance and some sympathetic. So you're on the football pitch and you're running around, but you can also think tactics. So it's not a cliff edge. And there's also the calm, feeling chilled. Maybe we're on your own or with your partner and you've got a window of tolerance. You can think and feel. And you can maybe connect to the TV. You can connect to your partner. Whereabouts is that? And for some children, their window of tolerance is horribly narrow. Babies start with a narrow window of tolerance. So the physiological state, social engagement is the window of tolerance. Fight, flight, aggressive defensive system, and then freeze or collapse. This is a very simplistic overview. In Want to Adopt, which is the book that came out in 2019, my book that came out in 2019, I think it's chapter 11, yes, chapter 11, I have an explanation of how the autonomic nervous system works and then kind of do a deep dive into it. And this chart gives a sense of how we can learn and potentially teach children the metaphorical temperature and color. If a kid is starting to realize they're going from burnt orange up to red and they're at boiling point and potentially going up to burnt volcanic, there may be some strategies that taught previously, so you pre-framed it, can help a child come down. I say a child, it could be an adult, because the thing with traumatized children, they grow into adults. Who knew? So that's worth thinking about. Now, just touching very briefly on learning. Children in the classroom, how do they learn? Or don't they? They are not going to learn when they're hyper-aroused. They are not going to learn when they're hypervigilant, bored, disengaged, feel shamed or criticized. And shame is feeling bad about self. So Tim is going to feel bad about self. Shame and guilt, two very different things. If you feel guilty, it means you've got some empathy, and because you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Shame is feeling bad about self. So for teachers, this is really very valuable information to help you think about how to work with kids in the classroom. And the beauty is the tools that are useful for kids who've been traumatized work with kids who haven't been. So why wouldn't you use them? There's quite a lot of material on Fab Parents around all of this stuff. Lots of resources and materials helping you step into other people's shoes. Lots of information, articles and whole load of other stuff. Another thing about if you are living with traumatized children, if you are therapeutically reparenting your children, it is often counterintuitive, because a kid may be functioning at the age of 18 months, but maybe 6'3". That's really quite challenging. How do you deal with that? And then also, if you're living with traumatized children, the whole child on parent violence is something that we are now talking about, and it wasn't talked about before. One of the benefits of Twitter has been, I think, quite useful in that, because people can be anonymous talking about child on parent violence, because you don't want to tell people, because it's shaming for your children. So it's difficult. Secondary trauma, that happens a lot for those of us who live with traumatized children. Been there, done it. For me, my guide is, am I losing my sense of humor? That's my first indication that I'm dropping into secondary trauma. And how do you avoid that? You get competencies, you get skills, you get understanding, you tool yourself up. Sounds a bit harsh, but you bring in useful tools to help you manage yourself, help you understand your children, so you understand what's going on, so you have a rethink on all of those things that are happening, and that makes a massive difference. So some tools to help you with that. Well, Bubble Wrap Children, although it says it's about social networking, transforming 21st century adoption, it is so much more. Masses on trauma, what happens to kids before, what happens afterwards. And I am currently in the process of updating it, which accounts for why it's got sticky labels and all sorts of other things. It was supposed to be an update. It's turning into a rewrite, to be honest. Lots more on trauma, lots more on memory, all of which integrate, and Tim and TAMIE weave through the new version of Bubble Wrap Children. I have to say, I'm already quite proud of it, and it's coming out in 2021. And just before we finish, just reflect on, what do you think happens to Tim and TAMIE? What do you think their outcomes are going to be if they get intervention, if they don't get intervention? It has a massive implication for them, and it has a massive implication for all of us. And quoting myself, it takes a village to raise a child, a town to raise a challenging child, and an entire city to raise a traumatized child. And we have to do it, because there is a cost benefit to all of this. If we do not help these kids, if we do not work with them, the outcomes for them and society are ghastly. There is, we know, a huge cost that comes from living with domestic violence. There's research and there is material out there. We have to get it to the decision makers. We have to convince politicians, judges, to understand these things. I have to say, with judges who I've trained, they get it just like that. Politicians, done a bit of that as well. And, you know, I was a member of a government task force. I have been less successful in that area, but we have to get society understanding that. The police know and have done research on the effect of early intervention. All of those things make a huge difference. So intervene early, support families who don't know how to parent well, support them, teach them, upskill them. Because otherwise, further down the line, we get violence, we get all sorts of things. Those limiting beliefs that are going on inside the child will result in it being externalized, taken out into violence and other things. and also internally into anxiety, into self-harming. The rates of self-harming in adoption and fostering is just awful. Kids end up in prison. They get groomed, they get involved in county lines, they get bullied. There's a whole range of things. You know, I'm a middle-aged, middle-class English woman. I have a lot of friends whose kids are in prison because they are friends that I know through adoption. I have stories that I could recite which will horrify you. And sometimes, you know, you just wouldn't believe them. We have to change this. This has to be changed. You can hear I get quite passionate about this. So if you want to learn more, and there's a lot more how-to tools in the online training, there's exercises, all sorts of things. And one of the things that I do is I do my diagrams, my material, my metaphors in a way that you can share it with other people. You will see that my diagrams, things like the cartoon at the beginning of Want to Adopt, she says, desperately trying to find it. Now, I've drawn that, and you will see that my drawings on flip charts, they are, I think the technical term is pretty rubbish. But the reason that they're like that is so that you can draw them on a napkin, you can share them with kids, you can share them with other people. Now, if I'm prepared to do that online in front of an awful lot of people or on a very big platform and draw these things, you can do that very same thing. So I'm all about understanding and helping you understand trauma-triggered behaviour, helping you understand how trauma can be melted,